speaking again with Senator Bruce Tarr. Hi, Bruce. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great, Heather. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. And you're still in informal sessions, sort of, right now, right?
We are. We can have a formal session, but we're still primarily conducting informal sessions.
Okay.
And Heather, right at the start of the show, I heard from some of our mutual friends at 1623 Studios a very important piece of information. And that is that KPN Today recently had its 300th broadcast. Is that correct?
Yeah, I wasn't counting, but somebody else was. And yes, I think we did. Yeah.
I'm glad they were, because we're not going to let that go unrecognized.
No way!
A Senate citation, and I'm going to read it, and we'll get it to you when we can, and I'm sure we'll be able to do that. But it reads, "Be it known that the Massachusetts Senate hereby extends its congratulations to Cape Ann Today in recognition of the milestone achievement of over 300 broadcasts originating from 1623 Studios. And be further known that the Massachusetts Senate extends its best wishes for continued success, that this citation be duly signed by the President of the Senate and attested to in a copy thereof transmitted by the Clerk of the Senate." And this is signed by our Senate President, Karen Spilka. It's attested to by our Clerk, Michael Hurley, and it's offered by me on September 24th of 2020. And I am so pleased to be able to recognize your great program.
Well, on behalf of 1623 Studios and Cape Ann Today, I thank you for that. And I know my whole team will be so appreciative of this honor. This is really an honor. So thank you so much to everyone there at the Massachusetts State Senate.
Well, you're welcome. We all appreciate what you do, and we've talked about this before, about connecting us and allowing us to share information, which is so important, particularly during the year of the pandemic, when information is really important every day. So thank you.
Well, you are quite welcome. And I will emphasize the fact that we did those 300 stories since March. So we were born out of the pandemic. That was our, when we sort of hustled to get things together and say, what can we do for this community? So it's really lovely that you honored us and recognized us. So, so please pass on our thanks to everyone there at the State Senate.
Will do.
And what should we talk about today, Senator?
Well, I think the most important piece of breaking news from the State House is the change in the guidance relative to restaurants. As we've talked about, as we move into the fall weather where it gets a little bit colder, a lot of us are worried about the loss of outdoor dining space, which has been really important to help keep a lot of restaurants going when they don't have as much seating capacity indoors because of the need for separation for social distancing. So we've been working with the governor and the reopening advisory board and the lieutenant governor, and they've issued some new guidance that helps to some degree with this. It's not a panacea, but one of the things that has happened is under the new guidance, we can have 10 people seated at a table as opposed to 6. And so that is a considerable increase, and it's largely based on the experience of other states, which have allowed 10 people to be at a table without a lot of negative consequences in terms of transmission of COVID-19. And the second piece, which is something that I've been working on with a lot of our restaurants, is the idea of being able to use bar space. We know that you can't operate a bar until we get to phase 4 of the reopening plan. And that means that in a lot of restaurants, there is dedicated space that can't be used. And again, it's important to be able to find as many options as we can to increase indoor seating because of the weather. We're going to be losing outdoor seating. So one of the things that was added to the guidance is the ability to use bar space with a couple of conditions. People still have to be seated 6 feet apart, and there has to be a barrier, a plexiglass barrier or some other kind of barrier that's at least 30 inches high, separating people from the bar itself. And so if there's a counter, that has to be there, but there can be a gap at the bottom so that food can be passed back and forth and empty plates and so forth. So these are two significant developments. The Restaurant Association has welcomed them and indicated that they will be helpful. And then the other thing, Heather, that I think it's important to remind people about is that we have an economic development bill that is in conference committee right now that also has some things that will hopefully benefit restaurants and other businesses. And we're hoping that the 6 members of the legislature that are working on that will report a conference report soon so that we can take action on it. So a lot of focus here on Beacon Hill as we move into the fall in trying to do things for restaurants, because we continue to be very, very concerned. And we've also seen closings which have also heightened that level of concern.
Yes. So are you seeing a lot of closings? Are you hearing about a lot?
I've seen them reported in the news, and particularly in the Boston area. There's been some fairly high-profile restaurants that have closed. Some have indicated that they're trying to find ways to stay open. And a lot of that involves putting up tents and using heaters. And in fact, there is a program that we talked about in our last discussion where you might be able to get heaters through the Shared Streets and Spaces program. And actually, we've been working with the administration in Gloucester, and Gloucester has filed an application for heaters through that program. And I know that's something that you and I have had a discussion about, and we've agreed that it could be pretty important. So credit here to Community Development Director Jill Cahill, who worked really hard to put something together and get it in under the deadline. And I believe Gloucester has asked for about $60,000 to try to get some of those heaters, not only with a thought about the fall and the winter, but also with an eye towards spring, where we may still be living with these conditions, and it may be important to have the heaters to open outdoor seating sooner than it might otherwise happen.
And I understand that you were in West Gloucester listening to the idling trains last week. Do you want to tell us about what's happening there?
Well, I was, and in fact, I'd point out, Heather, as you know, I actually live in West Gloucester, and so I can hear the trains in the distance when they are idling, but it's not nearly the level of impact that folks have had that live along the tracks and the rail line and in the vicinity of the train bridge. And it's important just to take a step back and remember that we've been working at this for years to try to get the train bridge repaired because it was identified as one of the worst train bridges in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And originally the project started to repair the bridge, and that was the goal. And what we were trying to do is always keep one track open. There are 2 tracks that run over the bridge. And so the idea was to essentially split the bridge in half and keep one track open for service while the other side of the bridge was being worked on. And then when that side was completed, being able to go to the other side and take that down and resume service on the track that had just been repaired. What wound up happening in the spring, and it was actually late winter, early spring, was that the MBTA and its contractors found that a lot of the structural components of the bridge really would not support that effort well. And in order to make them so that they would, it would cost another $15 million and probably add a couple of years to the length of the project. So those 2 things, cost and time and safety, drove a decision to go back to the drawing board and make it a bridge replacement project to just take out everything and all at once reconstruct the bridge or build a new bridge in its place. And so that created a new problem in that the train could not go to its usual resting place for overnight and for idling, which would be at the end or the beginning of the line, depending on how you look at it in Rockport, where, by the way, we also had idling issues. But this created a new set of noise issues. And so originally there was some detention of the train near the West Gloucester station. And that created a whole host of adverse impacts for people in that neighborhood. So they raised concerns, and the MBTA decided to move the idling detention spot to very close to the bridge. And that created another set of issues for folks that live in the condominiums that have recently been built in that area, for residents of Wolf Hill, and for others that live near the train bridge. And so then there was a thought, well, maybe we can move it back a little bit the other way, but that created a problem for the apartment complex that is in West Gloucester that used to be known as the Top of the Harbor Apartments, and near the ones that were created in the former Lee Page's factory. So no matter where you moved it, you created a problem. And so the folks that are nearest the bridge have spent the summer really dealing with some really serious noise impacts. And then most recently, the train moved back again to near the West Gloucester station, which caused folks in that neighborhood to once again have to deal with those issues. So we've been working very, very hard to find a solution that won't just push the noise off on somebody else, that will really create a more lasting fix here for the duration of the project. And right now, it's important to say that the goal is to have this project completed by next summer and be able to restore service, at least to the extent that the train will be able to run and this idling issue will go away. Now, there has been a request for an extension of the project, and I think that's been done largely as a precautionary measure, just in case. But the goal is still to get trains running over that bridge by next summer. That still means we have a long period of time to deal with noise. And so what we've worked on and what the MBTA has identified is a detention spot that is behind the Cape Ann Industrial Park, not too far from the Lily Pond, as it's called. And that's an area that is largely wooded, doesn't appear to affect any residences. And so that area has been signed, and so signs are along the tracks to say this is where the train should stop. Now, here's the one complicating factor. There are some times when the train doesn't have enough time to go back to that location and wait to be dispatched back to the station. So there will still be some idling at the West Gloucester station under this plan, but anything longer than 15 minutes should be happening at the Lily Pond Cape Ann Industrial Park detention area. Now, this is a fluid plan. It required some moving of switches and some changes so that for safety, folks will know that the train is moving back up the track. And that was an issue that actually had to get federal approval, which has been obtained. And hopefully soon, this plan will be able to be executed. It's already been partially executed, but there is a schedule that the MBTA has put together that shows which trains will be able to go to the detention area and which will have to go to the station in West Gloucester. But hopefully this is going to make things a whole lot better. But all of us are still committed, Representative Ferranti, the mayor, the members of the city council, all of us are still committed to staying with this and making sure that we get a good solution. We think this is it, but if it isn't, we'll continue to troubleshoot the situation.
Well, thank you for that. I have two questions. One is, why do they have to idle anyway? And I know that's a basic question, and maybe lots of people know the answers, but I don't.
I'm really glad you asked that question, because it was one of the first ones that I asked the MBTA.
Thank you.
I said, if the train is going to be idling for more than 15 minutes, why can't we just shut it down?
Right.
And there were a couple of different answers. One is that there's a compression system on the train that compresses air for the brakes. And if you were to turn the train on and off, that would cause problems for maintaining the pressure that you need. It takes time for the pressure to build up so the train can safely stop. I'm also told that there are federal regulations that require it when it's in service to stay running. And that has something to do with Homeland Security. And I can't give you as good an answer as I would like, but I'm told that there was, after the situation that happened, the tragic situation on 9/11, that there were new rules enacted around this that require the train to stay running as well. But it was the first thing that we asked is, why can't we solve this problem by just making the noise stop?
Right, right. Well, the second part of my question is, as you well know, this has been an issue in Rockport before the bridge construction for a long time. The people who lived near the train station have complained about that. So when the bridge is completed and the trains can continue to go to Rockport, will they idle again there? And do we have any resolutions for that?
So the answer is they will idle again there. And Representative Ferranti and I have asked for a meeting with the MBTA to revisit that issue. You may recall that we brought MBTA officials to the Rockport Board of Selectmen some months ago, certainly before the outbreak of COVID-19, to talk about some of the constraints that we all face in trying to find a solution in Rockport. And one of the things that I was struck by is how little downtime the trains have. The last one comes in, I believe, sometime around 1 a.m., and the first one has to start again around 4 a.m. And so there isn't much of a window when the trains actually aren't running, and that presents a significant issue. So we also know that the train is an important service for people on Cape Ann and very important for Rockport. And so we are committed to try to find a way to maintain regular service, but address this. And some people, Heather, have written and called our offices and said, you recently did a transportation bond bill. Is there money that's in that bill, which, by the way, is still in conference committee, but is there money that could be used for this? And the answer is there could. But money, believe it or not, is not the biggest problem in this situation. The biggest problem is engineering a solution. And the only thing that's shown some promise is to develop an enclosure, a three-sided enclosure, where idling trains would dwell while their engines are on. And we've gotten some mixed reviews from engineers about how effective that would be, but it really seems to be the most promising tool that we could use. So we're going to keep the discussion going on those lines. You may also remember that there was a time a couple of years ago when we spent a lot of energy on trying to come up with a reconstruction plan for Rockport Station, because it's been far too long that station has been in its current state. And part of that discussion was, could we move the train, just as we're in the West Gloucester situation, closer to Gloucester, so that it would go more into the woods and the idling wouldn't affect residences as much. Right. The problem with that, I'm told, is that when you move it in that direction, you're moving it closer to some watershed area that's particularly environmentally sensitive. And so that may be an insurmountable constraint. But we are continuing to have the conversation, and we are very much aware that when normal train service resumes, idling will continue to be a problem in Rockport, and we're trying to use this time to be able to identify solutions before that happens.
That's great. I know that a lot of residents of that area near the train station would be appreciative. So anything else you would like us to know this week?
Well, let me think about that. We are continuing in informal session. We are hoping that we're going to see some conference committee reports come back. And we are really now drilling down into the budget. And it appears that most of October will be spent trying to develop a state budget for the remainder of fiscal year 21. So that's where a lot of the discussion is right now. And there's also a lot of discussion about, again, trying to help businesses through economic development means. And of course, Heather, we're still looking to Washington for assistance, but realistically, it doesn't seem like we'll see any of that before the election. And that creates a significant problem, both in terms of balancing the state budget and in terms of helping people who are unemployed and in terms of people who are employers and running businesses that have paid a very high price for the rules that are keeping us safe.
I know the governor scolded Washington, D.C. a little bit in the news yesterday. So it's so hard for these states to figure out what to do, right?
It really is. And, one thing that government scholars would note is that the federal government does have the ability to print money. And while we certainly don't like to see deficit spending, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts does not have that ability. We're required to have a balanced budget. And that balanced budget depends on a number of things, including federal assistance, but also tax revenue. And again, projections are that we're going to have a significant decrease in that because people aren't working and businesses aren't able to open. And if they are able to open, not to the level that they had been prior to the pandemic. So there is a really particularly challenging set of circumstances here that we are trying to wrestle with.
Well, we thank you for that wrestle and all your service. And thank you again for acknowledging Cape Ann today. We really appreciate that. And next week, maybe we can catch up on the economic development bill. Maybe there'll be good news for restaurants and businesses in there.
Well, yeah, I would love to talk about that, and also hopefully we could talk about a little bit food security grants, because we may have some news about that.
Great.
And also next week would probably be a good time to talk about Amendment 23 to the Groundfish Management Plan, which is really heading toward a decision, and that decision may be something that could be very harmful to our commercial fishing fleet. So it'd be good to get an update on that next week as well.
Yes, we look forward to that. Isn't that decision coming soon?
It is coming very soon, and in fact, we're working. I just had a conversation with the governor and had one with the lieutenant governor earlier today, and the lieutenant governor was in Gloucester yesterday, actually visiting Fisherman's Wharf and the new harbor master facilities, and a lot of folks came out to talk to her about the severity of an adverse Amendment 23 and how devastating that could be for a lot of our fishing vessels.
And just to catch people up, this is the monitors, the New England Fisheries Management Council will decide. Is that right? Am I saying that right?
Well,
you go.
The NEFMC develops the plan and passes the plan, and then it goes to NOAA for final approval. So there are a couple of steps left, but the NEFMC meeting is coming up next week. And that's something that we're very concerned about and trying to muster as much advocacy as we can. Not to say we shouldn't have some level of monitoring, and not to say that we shouldn't be getting information that fuels research about management of the stocks, but that this may not be the best way to do it, particularly if it winds up crushing the industry with the cost of 100% monitoring. And the challenge, Heather, is that right now the federal government is paying for the whole tab for that monitoring, but the plan says the industry is supposed to pay for it. So the federal funding could go away at any time, and that would leave the industry to pay for something it can ill afford, particularly given decreased revenue because of the pandemic.
Right, right. And I believe it's $700 a monitor, and they're advocating for 100% monitors, right?
That's correct.
Well, let's hope for some good news next week on that for our fishermen. And any good news would it be a good thing? So we look forward to something next week.
We'll look really hard for some good news. I'm sure we'll be able to find some. But we actually have good news today, and that is that we're well served in our community by 1623, a great cable access studio, and with the great programs like K-Band today. So there's good news.
There's good news. All right. Thank you. See you next week.
All right. Thank you, Heather. See you then.
Bye.